A lot of car problems are just an inconvenience, but if you ignore the wrong problems, you could be in for a seriously dangerous situation or a massive repair bill. If you're like me and you have a trusty old car, you know not everything's perfect. If your car drips a little oil on the driveway, makes a lot of noise, or if the check engine light's been on since the day you bought it, well, it worked for the last guy. So in today's video, I'm gonna go over 5 car problems and their symptoms that you should never ignore if you wanna keep your car and your wallet intact. I've seen people ignore all these problems at one time or another, and it never ends well. So you're gonna wanna stick around to the end, make sure it doesn't happen to you. So the first one I want to talk about is the oil pressure warning light on your dash. So when that comes on your dashboard, it means that your oil pressure is not what it's supposed to be. Usually means it's low. And low pressure in your engine is really bad because it means there's not enough pressure to get the oil to the top of the engine where the smaller moving parts are. And without oil, you start to get a ton of friction. And very quickly, your engine starts eating itself alive and it seizes up and stops working. Now you need a new engine for your car. So I can't stress enough that if you see that light come on your dashboard, you need to shut the engine down immediately. Like, don't try to get to the next gas station, try to get home, try to make it to your mechanic, because once that light is on and there's low oil pressure, the engine can destroy itself so fast. And if you catch it in time, you get it shut down in time, you may save the engine and everything will be fine once that problem is addressed. Now, for all you smarty pants out there, yes, I realize that the light on the dash could just be something simple like the oil pressure switch has gone bad. Is that really a gamble that you want to make with your engine? Something I'm always preaching to everyone, including on this channel, is the importance of looking at all the gauges on your instrument panel. And this brings up our next super expensive car problem that you don't want to ignore: overheating. And the number one way that you tell if your car is overheating is by the temperature gauge on your dash. I swear, so many people, including some that I live with, don't know that the temperature gauge exists on their dashboard and never look at it. With most cars, especially the older ones, there's not going to be a light that comes on telling you that your engine's overheating. The only indicator you're going to get from the car is that rising temperature gauge. Now, they're not as reliable, but there are a couple other symptoms of overheating that you could have. One, if you're running the air conditioning at the time, you'll probably experience your air conditioning stop working. It'll start blowing warm. Another could be if there's a coolant leak that's big enough, you could see steam coming out from under your hood. And if you notice either of those things, it's a really good time to check out that temperature gauge if you haven't already and see what's happening. One of the most common things that can happen with an overheated engine is a blown head gasket, which can cost thousands to repair. And that can happen after only running a few minutes at high temperatures. Now, there are other things that can happen with an overheated engine. All of them are bad. All of them are expensive to fix. So just like the oil light, if you see that temperature gauge up in the hot, you want to get it shut off right away and address the problem before there's more damage. Now, luckily for you, we have a great video on all the reasons why your engine overheats and what you can do about it. And we'll put a link to that above. Now, unlike when you see that oil pressure light on the dash where you want to shut the engine off and never turn it back on again, if you're stuck on the side of the road with an overheated engine, there is a way that you can limp it home on your own. So the damage really occurs when that temperature gauge is up at the hottest point. So as long as you let the car cool off, you can maybe drive it a little farther, making sure that that needle doesn't go back to the H. Or if you've been leaking coolant out, you can let it cool down enough to put water in the radiator, and that will again help you get a little bit further. Since we're having such a great time together, I just wanted to remind you to subscribe to Budget Mechanic so we can save you a whole lot of time, money, and grief with your car in the future. Now, the next issue you don't want to ignore has to do with your brakes. There's lots of things that can go wrong with your brakes, and obviously you want to address all those things. But there is one that's a little bit sneaky and a lot of people miss and can be really dangerous: a failing master brake cylinder. This is your master brake cylinder, and we have a great video on that if you want to check out more in depth, and we'll throw the link to that up above. But essentially what this does is it pushes the fluid to the 4 corners of your car and clamps the brake pads down onto your rotors to stop it. And it has a primary circuit, which is when it's working normally, but when that starts to fail, it goes to kind of a backup circuit. So it still works, but it's kind of on the emergency one. So as you can imagine, if that backup circuit on this cylinder fails, well, now you're really up a creek, because now you don't have brakes anywhere in the car. So that's why it's super important that you don't ignore a failing master brake cylinder. So how do you know that your master cylinder is failing? Well, the biggest symptom is that when you pump your brakes and hold it, your pedal slowly sinks to the floor instead of just remaining firm. And this is why this issue can be kind of sneaky and a lot of people don't know it's happening, because the brakes still work because they're maybe operating off of that backup circuit on the master cylinder. So you want to pump up your brakes and hold it, and it should stay in that same position, firm. If it's sinking all the way to the floor, that's a bad sign. If after coming to a stop, your foot slowly sinks to the floor, it's time to check out that master brake cylinder. Now, sometimes there will be brake fluid leaking from the bottom of the master cylinder, and it's something that you can see, but oftentimes they leak internally and you can't see outward signs of it failing, and that brake pedal test is all you've got. Old cars make a lot of noise on the highway because they're old cars, but there's one noise that you definitely don't want to ignore. Period. And that brings me to my next dangerous car problem, a failed wheel bearing. Now, bad wheel bearings can be a little bit hard to diagnose, but the way that you would know that yours is failing is probably a roaring or growling sound inside the car when you're going at highway speeds. One big clue will be that the sound will follow the speed of the car, not necessarily the RPM of the engine. So the faster the car drives along the highway, the louder the noise will get, versus if you rev the engine and the noise suddenly gets louder, that might be more of an engine issue. Also, sometimes this bearing sound will be kind of in a pulsing way, like a roar, 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 while going 60 miles an hour. By the way, if that mouth noise I just made didn't help you out, we made a video on car noises with actual audio examples, including a wheel bearing, and you can check that out at the link above. Now, the reason I put a failed wheel bearing on this list and why it can be such a dangerous problem is because a lot of car designs are such that if the wheel bearing completely fails and separates, the wheel could just fly off the car. And driving around a three-wheeled car on a highway is not recommended. Now, for you smarty pants out there, yes, I know that a bad tire can make a very similar sound on the highway to a bad wheel bearing. So if you're hearing that noise coming from one of your wheels, maybe swap the tire with another one, and if the sound doesn't move, most likely it's your bearing, not your tire. Little rattling sounds that you hear or feel in the steering wheel in an older car are pretty par for the course. Now, you could spend thousands of dollars tracking down and fixing little suspension and steering noises that you hear, but I really feel it's not worth the money when a lot of those things really aren't safety issues at all. And this brings us to our next big, expensive, and potentially dangerous car problem. When those little rattles turn into clunks. Now, that clunking noise here is actually my rack and pinion, which is something that I've looked at and determined isn't a safety issue. But if I didn't know what that sound was, I would be pretty concerned, because clunking noises, that's pointing to something actually getting close to failure. And if one of those things happens to be a tie rod, a ball joint, or a control arm, you could actually totally lose steering while out on the road. That is a serious problem. So like with my car, big clunking noises don't necessarily mean a safety issue, but it does mean you want to check it out, make sure you know where it's coming from before you drive the car anymore. If you're interested, we have a great video on all things suspension and how to diagnose it yourself. We'll throw the link above. If you guys think I missed any items on this list, let me know in the comments. And if you did enjoy the video, you're going to want to check out this one we made on easy maintenance steps that most people forget leading to costly repairs. Thanks for watching.